an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Immortal Great Souls series, Book 2, The Rascor Plains, chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. In these chapters, our friends have to convince an understandably dubious populace that we may seem like we're one of them, but we're really not. But we're not, though. And I know that we're mostly telling the truth, but I get why people don't really feel super confident. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. What's up, Dan? Y'all, this section, it was very interesting because, what we've got here, and, this is not news, but we've got one of those, the people with power have such an out of proportion amount of power that despite the dream of what if we all band together, doesn't even seem like it would make a difference. And I was genuinely disappointed, but also had to confess it was true at the reaction that Scorio has to some of these people who are just common folk being like, well, we could just bring everything to a screeching halt and then they'd have to listen. I have said those words myself. I have. And when Scorio responds with, then you're even more naive than I thought, I felt like I'd been shot. But I had to back up and really consider that, to a point, there is some truth to that, It's sort of like the fundamental laughable part of anybody who's a prepper and is stockpiling these little weapons. And it's you're going to be going up against, if your nightmare scenario, I say nightmare, but really for these people, it seems like it's sort of a dream scenario were to occur, you would be so hilariously outgunned that all of these years of assembling an armory would feel like a drop in a bucket. It would be nothing. And so there's a part of me that gets it, and we're also, there's another aspect of it. Well, if things worked the way they do now, where we don't want to look like we're run by tyrants, and so we are going to, back off when the populace pushes back. I still think it could work, but it really depends on how far your opponents are willing to take it, which is really what it comes down to here, because Scorio's theory is that Praximar is basically willing to take it as far as it needs to go. And I'm a little bit surprised by that, to be honest, because a part of me is don't you think Praximar at least is going to want to keep up appearances of being the good guy? But when I stopped to consider it, I was considering the situation, I think that if you just get rid of all of the people that are witness to a thing, you can just change the narrative to be whatever you need it to be. So I'm not even sure that's going to matter. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, because chapter 4, we are still climbing underground. And it's a very steep climb. There's just this tiny crack that they all have to wiggle through. And I love the fact that there's a point where he's thinking about how Nissa is just leading them and they're following without a word, because at this point they're in and there's no point in arguing about it. And he mentions that she has dark vision to a point, which means that she has ignited her heart. And he has a lot of questions about how that could have happened. And we wind up getting some answers to those questions that I find, like, it's not even, she's very cagey. I hesitate to even say answers because that feels too generous, but there's a real energy from Nyssa of, we're not so different, you and I, that she's having with Scorio, that a part of me finds almost funny because it's such a cliche, but I don't mean a cliche like this writer being cliche. I want to be clear. I feel he's aware. It feels like cliche of her as a person, and that's a very fine distinction, and I may be wrong. I'm copying to the fact that I'm sort of putting on this the intent that I want. But I really feel like Nyssa is almost lying to herself about the kind of person that she and Scorio each are. And I'll be very fascinated to see where this winds up going. So eventually, Lianshi is just like, who built all of this? Because there's a lot of, like, caverns here. And she says, regular folks with time on their hands. And I was like, is that true? Something about that answer felt like bullshit, but, so he asks, how did you get involved with all this? And she just says, later. They come out into a chamber, and there are a bunch of people who are behaving really nervous about the presence of these folks. There's clearly some anxiety in general. I have to imagine that things echo down here, and probably they heard the sound of lots of footsteps coming and didn't know what to make of it. Their expressions ranging from merely suspicious to outright truculent. Y'all, truculent. What a spectacular word. Not used nearly enough. I fully approve of it. And I like that when Nyssa says relax, she amends it immediately with just a little. And there's a tall woman described as, like, rail thin with yellow hair, and she seems to be the one that's sort of in charge. I don't know if that's really fair to say. She's the first to speak, and there's an energy to her that she's the one that sort of, I won't say she decides what happens here, because everybody seems to have input, but it seems like she's got a lot of influence over the group here. So then there's a broad-shouldered man with a bristling mustache, and he has heard of Scorio and is like, that's an academy student. Like, the Imperator herself vouchsafed his return. Scorio sensed the need to speak up. Yes, he did. And for a few weeks I thought my troubles were behind me, but Praximar didn't want me there and did his best to get rid of me. When I came first in the final gauntlet, I chose to leave the academy and not enter any house. Why? Because I don't trust Praximar, nor do I trust anything that we've been taught. I don't know what the truth is, but I know it's not what was spoon-fed to us at the academy, nor what we've been told by the houses, added Jova firmly. Or it says, nor what will be told by the houses. Maybe she is saying, like, were we to speak with them? I'm not really sure why that's in, like, future tense, but it doesn't really matter. And Scorio points out that all of these people here left with him, and that he ran into this enforcer, that they were on their way to speak to somebody from Manticore, and they took him down, and plans have changed quite dramatically. So this woman, her name is Abintha, I think is the way he pronounces it in the audiobook. She says, do you aim to help us in our revolt? And Scorio truly seems blindsided by this. And there is a point later on that we will get to when he has to take a moment and really consider the fact that he hasn't bothered to worry about the common people most of the time. And I'm so glad that this is being acknowledged. But we'll get there. Sorry, Dan says there's a lot in this series about how you can change corrupt structures of power. And then Devin came into the chat, just dropping in to say hi. Work starts in 20 minutes, so unfortunately can't stay. Just wanted to say that you covering this series is legit making life worth living at the moment. So excited for this book. Oh, delighted to see you, Devin. Wonderful to have another person in the chat on this book, because it's it kind of goes in cycles. But Dan is usually the only one here. So Naomi says, we're here to learn what you intend and how to pull it off. I was born in Bastion, same as you all. And you're courting massacres like the one we just saw. So you march in here like you own the place and demand instant obedience. This dude, he's a young man with black hair described as wiry. I wanted somebody to be like, demand instant obedience to what? They haven't demanded anything yet. It was a weird comment, and I wanted somebody to be like, what do you even mean? We're just talking at this point. But nobody really pushes back on it. So then Scorio explains how he came up from nothing and was like, literally in rags. And he says, guys, no offense, but y'all have clubs and spears up against people with magic. You may as well have spoons, which is very... It's like really brutal, but honestly fair. And then Abentha says, sometimes a fight needs fighting regardless of the outcome, which is immediately followed up with Jova saying, easy to say while you hide down here. But I felt like, first of all, Jova, you don't, like, the fact that they're hiding, that doesn't mean they're not doing anything. So back off. And secondly, Abentha's argument, sometimes a fight needs fighting regardless of the outcome, hit me hard. That I really want to have this attitude more often, because sometimes I will really let the logic of something get in the way a little bit of the fact that it's just the right thing to do, even if it doesn't really work out. And that's not to say that's always the right call, because sometimes being more cautious is what's actually more effective. And you really do have to know in the situation what is going to be the right tact to take in whatever your circumstances happen to be. Are you making a point? Are you standing up to be a symbol? Or are you trying to actually effect a change and, get certain pieces to fall into place and get gears moving? If that's the case, sometimes, behaving this way doesn't work. So I feel like that's sort of what Jova is suggesting, but I did think that line was kind of profound. So Scorio says, like, we're not sympathetic to what's happened, but we also are trying to, point out that there hasn't been a successful revolution in almost 1,000 years. And this is when the guy says, we're the lifeblood of the city. If we stand together, they'll either have to listen to us or rule over ashes. And Scorio says, then you're more naive than I thought. Praximar would rather starve than give you a seat at his table, and would happily slaughter people for daring to ask for more. And really, when it comes down to the actual power structure, it probably is true. Probably. Okay, so I have to back up here a little bit and talk about, I hesitate to even call this a theory, because I feel like that's too strong. It's a thought. It's not even like a fledged theory. That suggests that it is more cohesive than it really is. But you guys, thing that I keep kind of coming back to when it comes to Bastion and the way that it functions and how sort of bizarre some of the setup of this place is. I keep sort of wondering. So we have the fact that the place is oddly, like, cylindrical, right? I kind of want to go back to the very first book and find the description, but I don't want to lose my spot here. But you know what? I kind of want to do it because it's something that I haven't, like, checked myself, and so now I'm going, wait a second, how much do I remember correctly about this? So the thing about the setup of this place is, Dan says, I gotta post a diagram. Someone made a nice pic on the Reddit for what Bastion would like in the ground. I feel like that was probably a misspelling, but that's okay. I'm jumping to, let's see, the chapters where because in the first book, he goes out into the actual city, like, in the probably 6th chapter or so? Is that, or no, it looks like later. He's still talking to Sal here. So, all right, yeah, because chapter 12 we've gone too far. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to get here because there's a weird, like, it almost at the time when I was reading the description of this world, it was so bizarre that I just sort of let it wash over me and didn't really try and stop and picture it and figure it out. So here it is. The cadmium yellow burn from above felt unnatural, felt wrong somehow. Yet grimacing against the glare, he slowly began to distinguish a slender glowing wire stretching across the sky. The space outside was vast, a cylinder so huge he could barely grasp its enormity. He took one final glance around the cave, set the bridge upon the ground, and swept black wind into the treasure's funnel. So he climbs out, and let's see, I'm trying to find the sun wire or source of light or whatever it was, stretched like a filament of spun gold through the air above, a central axis around which the city of Bastion curved. Its buildings set along the inside of a vast cylinder. Streets rose up on both sides to meet on the far side of the sun wire, perhaps a dizzying 4,000 feet above. He could make out life playing all around him and on the far streets above. Small dots moving that could have been pedestrians, the top of vegetation of buildings. Everybody was pulled toward the street beneath their feet, even if they walked directly overhead. The sun wire's light filled the entire cylinder. Its glow washed out details, reduced shadows to dusty darkness, and the rest to shades of yellow, orange, and amber. It was anchored at the left end of the cylinder to a vast, ornate protrusion of pale marble. But as pristine and glorious as that anchor point seemed to be, the leftmost part of Bastion that abutted it was in ruins. Ruins that had consumed a third of the city in whose periphery he now sat. Scorched buildings, streets between them having often collapsed into chasms whose depths glowed with fire or perhaps smoldering magma. All the way around the ruins extended from where Scorio sat up both sides of the cylinder to meet at the top. A belt of ruin and gray stone, of burning light from cavernous depths that competed with the sunwire's own refulgent glow. Endless city blocks, a cordon of desolation and dark stone. No greenery, no vegetation, no color, but the charred remnants of once grand buildings. And then he starts looking around at the city. A large building to his right blocked his view of the cylinder's other end, where the sun wire was no doubt attached to a similar anchor. But what he could see was the same grand architecture with bridges and broad avenues. And the buildings weren't uniform. There was a huge ring set on the cylinder's side, so that from this vantage point, Scorio could see a great arena within, while stadium seating descended from its high walls right down to the sands. I think that it's the opposite side where the sun wire is poking through what seems to be blue sky and clouds, if I am not mistaken. That isn't in the description here because he doesn't see this until later, if I'm remembering correctly. So, it sort of made me think about a battery. It made me think of a battery. And it made me wonder if we're using people as a power source somehow. And I'm not trying to get too matrixy in here, but there is some reason why everybody allegedly has a heart that they could ignite, and not everybody gets to do it. And I have to assume that it's something to do with siphoning power away from people somehow, and all of it going to certain folks so that other people are left without power. I don't know how that ties in with if it's the sun wire itself that's functioning both as a light source and as a siphon, if it's completely unrelated to that, and a power source for what? I don't know. We know there are other worlds and there are weird sort of spaces between them, because we saw Imogen break out of her space and have to travel to get to the edge of Bastion and get in. So there's some sort of network of places, but it's just on my mind. And it keeps popping up for me. It had been, and I never brought it up because there was just enough to talk about. I didn't have to do this, But when I try and imagine why you would be fine with all of the people dying, the main populace, the only reason that I could think of that being an acceptable outcome is because either you are using them anyway, and I don't know, maybe all of them choosing to die wouldn't affect things. I don't know. But then there's the aspect later on where the White Queen is apparently dumping Bastion and leaving it to its own devices, which sucks, but we'll get there. Something about this is giving a constructed world that is built in a way to benefit somebody specific in a specific way. And I am wondering if maybe the reason that the Archspire has been moved is part of the redirect of that power. If the place that it had been was for a certain reason, and then where it is now, it is basically a sort of creating an alternate route for power to go and changing up who has access to it in a different way. This is all, like I said, I don't even want to call it a theory because it feels so nebulous right now. But I just wanted to bring it up, and I'm going to go back to the second book now where we had left off. So Abentha says, matters in Bastion can be much improved. Poverty is on the rise. The houses tax us into perdition. We're expected to fulfill traditional obligations that hearken to centuries past with the meager resources available to us today. The ruins are squeezing our poor into ever tighter living quarters, but the rich won't open their wards to us. We live like rats while there are empty manors in the fanciest areas. We want changes in the law code. We want reduced taxes. We do want a seat at the council table, and we want to help improve Bastion's odds of survival at any cost. That's what we fight for. That's a tall order, said Naomi softly. Just like I said, I was born in Bastion like you. If I thought there was a chance of convincing the autocrators to listen, I'd fight eagerly by your side, but they won't. They're greed and stupidity personified. Then we'll die, said Abentha simply. We'll die regardless. Might as well do it with a little dignity. So this is when Scorio comes up with the idea of appealing to the White Queen as being like the one person that feels outside of this and didn't seem to have the same frame of mind as the rest of the Academy. I don't know what to call all of them, because saying immortal great souls, she is one of them. So how do you, just the council, I guess? I feel like it stretches to a bigger idea than that, but whatever. So Scorio says she lives at the Fiery Shoals. Isn't that close? And Leonci says, relative to the 10th layer of hell, she's close. The Fiery Shoals are on the outskirts of the Rascor Plains. It would take at least 10 days on foot to reach, said the mustachioed older man, if you ran into no trouble and had a guide. 10 days isn't bad. Scorio warmed to the idea. And we want to get out onto the Rascor Plains regardless. And Abentha is like, why would she listen to you? And he's like, well, she knows me. She vouched for me. Like, I feel like she might. I can't guarantee it, but that's the, one kind of idea that he's got going for him. And really the main goal for these chapters is to convince everybody to back off of their plans to just launch into a full-scale rebellion that is going to result in lots of deaths just for a while. They just need to give him some time. And if they want to do that after, and he proves to be ineffective and she won't listen, fine, they can. But just hold off a little bit. Somebody tries to be like, well, we can't guarantee anything. And I was just like, if you can't just find a way to get everybody on board with this, sir, then your rebellion is doomed to fail. Because if you are all coming together for this fight, you've got to at least be able to organize when to hold off and when to launch. So if I can convince her the rebellion is as big a threat to the city as Imogen's attack was, I'm sure she'll come. And Abentha says that's assuming she doesn't already know and simply doesn't care. And Scorio admits that's true. I kind of want, I was expecting him to be like, no, I know her and she would never, but I appreciate that he isn't so naive as to be like, I'm positive that's not what's happening here. He cops right away to, I'm not saying that's impossible. And after everything that he has learned and gone through, I feel like I need him to exhibit this willingness to step back and admit that anybody is capable of anything. And just because he has met somebody and had a good impression, that they are not necessarily an open book that he can read completely accurately at all times. So he says, it's a gamble, but fighting in the streets is worse than a gamble. It's suicide. And she says, why would you do this? You don't know us. And he says, in the end, because it's the right thing to do. You all agree with your spokesman? Yes, said Naomi immediately. We do, rumbled Leonis. I was once known as the Golden King. I would never have ruled as the houses here do, and would work against them to make things right. Same, said Leonci, though I was no queen. I mean... Jova trailed off and pinched the bridge of her nose. Why not? While I can't claim to be entirely sympathetic to this brand of idiocy, I'm also not in favor of how the houses run the city. Yes, if it gets us out to the Fiery Shoals and an audience with the White Queen, sure, we can learn more from her while we're about your business. So everybody gets, they all throw in Zala and Juniper as well. And Scorio mentions the herdsmen here, and it says the 5 rebel leaders hesitated and then glanced at each other in confusion. They shook their heads. Initially, when they hesitated, I took that as a sign that they knew something and they were looking at one another to decide whether to tell him. But I don't think that's true. I think they are hesitating like herdsmen. Like, is that anything? I don't think so. So, Chapter 5. They settled down once Abentha and her companions quit the chamber. And Nissa is peeling off these burn scabs. She can't leave them alone, which I can really relate to. And she describes that her power is resisting damage, and the more intense the damage, the more charged up a battery she has that fuels an attack. And her attack is a mixture of what the damage did to her. So right now, she'll have a fire attack along with stab wounds. And later on, or actually, no, it's not later on. It's almost right immediately. Naomi's like, so you stabbed yourself. And she says, yeah, I have to remember not to do it around other people. But it's an easy way to ensure I'm always packing a punch. But a funny thing, I'm starting to become more resistant to stabs. It's taking more work. And I have to assume that this is her heart getting stronger, maybe? That she's sort of powering up, because that's like a trauma that she's inflicting on herself that is similar to the trauma of fighting. And I don't know. This is an interesting power, and the fact that we're not sure exactly how she ignited her heart in the first place. I don't know how much she knows about the ways to advance. There's a lot of questions still. So, finally, Scorio says, why'd you run back underground with Hestia and Halvor? Why'd you ditch us? And she says, I've asked myself that same question. And in the end, I think I made the right call. But it's why I was glad to see you'd survived. Death means eventual rebirth, which means being tossed back into those tunnels. I'd spent 4 years in the dark with Sal. There was no way I was going to risk dying and repeating that jail time. I couldn't do that to myself. So I ran. Simple. I felt terrible for everyone else, but I couldn't risk it. And now you're a martyr for the people? It doesn't add up. Now, said Nissa with a smile, I get to do all kinds of lovely things for the right reasons and the right people. Sort of. I'm no longer as fragile as an eggshell. I can take a beating. And lo and behold, there's an entire city of innocents mad for revenge against the very people who've locked me up time and time again. Why wouldn't I help them get justice and my own pound of flesh in the meantime? So you're just being opportunistic. Aren't we all? You said yourself you'd not thought twice about this rebellion till you ran right into it. And I've seen you in the streets over the past few months, in your nice academy robes, well fed, with your happy friends. The rebellion is an opportunity for you too. But I don't judge you for it. We're the same. You and I, she literally says it. Red listers, survivors, we do what we have to in order to survive, and if we can dole out a little vengeance along the way, all the better. And Scorio says, that's not what I'm about. And she just responds with, sure, sure. Either way, it's good to see you doing well. And this is a very interesting point, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more further on when we run into Mimic, and he points out that Scorio is suddenly overwhelmed with a feeling of civic duty, because that was a very rightfully placed barb. So he tells her what happened with him, and he says, how did you ignite your heart? And she doesn't want to tell him. Eventually he's like, did you join a house? Was it Manticore? And she says, rest, you're swaying. And I need you to catch your beauty sleep, or else, you're going to fumble what you've got. And he watches her with a vibe of just, I don't like this. Naomi, when she meets up with him, says she's hiding almost as much as I was when I met you. So I'm very, very curious about Nyssa. I feel like Nyssa is what Naomi could have become were things to go worse for her. Like, Nyssa has been reborn again and again and knows that about herself. I feel like the fact that Naomi's only been born the once and gone through all this bullshit the one time is the only reason that she is being as optimistic as she is joining up with Scorio at this point. And I'm not sure she would have been able to preserve this. One life was almost enough to make it so that she couldn't stand to be around him. Multiples, I think that would be a ship that had sailed, you know? So he wakes up and Nyssa is in front of him. Abentha sent word you're to talk to a gathering of important people. They're willing to hear you out. And essentially, he has to be the face of this. They have to, like, you have to talk to them, and they're ready to march right now. So you're going to have to make a really good case here. We're on the brink, and people are taking heart from those who have already taken to the streets. Soon we'll reach a point of no return. We have to hurry. So they get up there, and there are people chanting and protesting all of this, and finally he gets up there, and he runs into Dola. And it seems like Dola is sort of willing to let bygones be bygones for now. It's not, to me, like we're just going to leave it, period, but more that, well, we've got bigger fish to fry with this whole rebellion right now, but I haven't forgotten how you screwed me, and if I get a chance to fuck you, I will, is the energy that I'm getting off of her. And I don't know. She seems like almost to have let it go here, but I just can't really believe that. She isn't the type. She isn't the type to let things go. All right, so this is when he shares his plan. And he says, like I said earlier, if I'm wrong, then you can march to your deaths. Give me 10 days. Why should you listen to me? I'm wearing the robes of a great soul, aren't I? I've eaten my fill each day in the academy, been spoon-fed the finest elixirs, and not known a day of hardship in my life, right? Grumbles, nods, narrowed eyes. Wrong. And he tells them how he came up from nothing, yada, 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 this whole thing. And he peels off his robe and says, this is not who I am. And then he ignites and turns into his wild dragony self and says, this is who I am. And he says all of his titles. And it was kind of funny because he's saying all of these titles in a speech where he's trying to get them to trust him. But they're all titles that seem very bad to me. And, like, maybe the point is supposed to be they gave me these titles, and if they don't approve of me, then that has to be a good thing for you guys. But I'm not totally sure that's what he meant. I don't know. So he finishes, and instead of there being, like, a raucous cheer that goes up, it's just Dola slow clapping, which I did find very funny, because I thought that he might get, like, a yeah, you know, and he does not. I think the boy actually means what he says, so why not? We can give him 10 days. We've enough clout to blunt it. We pull back our immediate people and the rest will follow. Everyone here knows I'm not afraid of a scrap, but if there's a chance we can avoid going toe-to-toe with the great souls, well, why not? So Nyssa jumps in and is also like, yeah, let's give him the 10 days. And he realizes belatedly that, like, oh shit, I managed to stop it. I managed to possibly save the lives of a lot of people. You've 10 days, Scorio. Dola stared up at where he stood. 10 days to reach the White Queen, and if we don't hear from you both, by then, we'll take to the streets and bring the whole city down with us. Agreed, said Scorio. I'll be back before then. Then it's decided. Send runners, pull the barricades down, disperse the columns, get the word out. We wait. The houses will know 10 more days of peace. So, that's all set. And I like the whole thing with how are we going to get to the plains. Dola's listening and is just like, hey, is there a problem? And they have to be like, no problem, no problem at all. No, we're just figuring out how we're, gonna start, but we've got a plan. We know exactly how. And I was just like, oh man, I don't need you to be lying to Dola. She's gonna find out, and it's gonna. I feel like this just. I don't know, man. So then we go to the interlude, The White Queen, and we get some bad news. Oh. So Nova gazed out over the black iron balcony at the lava field below. Noxious fumes rose from its turgid surface, dark patterns oozing and stretching over the dull orange glow. Alexander is pressing for an answer, said Desiree from the council table that ran the length of the echoing room. He doesn't appreciate uncertainty. She heard Desiree shifting through papers. Grunch sent word that the retreat from Last Rock is growing poorly. We are fortunate the Blood Ox chose to consolidate his control of the Citadel instead of outright pursuit, but the Great Souls are divided and consumed by political infighting. He demands, politely, that you come to establish order. And it seems that others have become aware of your new openness to alternatives, which I am not sure what that means. Crimson Earl Endergrass has renewed his invitation that you join the Golden Star. The Circle of Blades would appreciate your support in monitoring the Emerald Host's advance. Malvin the Yellow has sent a marriage offer. I am assuming that these are like the alternatives to being on the council? But I don't like the Golden Star, Circle of Blades, these sound like houses in Bastion sound, like not they're organizations, but how are they different? Like, what do they do? I don't know anything. You have your pick of any advanced station under their control. Blood Baroness Shibiku insinuates that Imperator Enflorixio would welcome you to his host. The list of invitations goes on and on. What are you going to do? And Nova says, it's been but half a year since Imogen attacked. Had I not been there, the consequences would have been disastrous. For whom exactly? Bastion, obviously. The Academy. The Archspire. True, but we have less than a decade before they're destroyed regardless. And as Shibiku said, and Endergrash, or is it Shikibu? Sorry. And Endergrass and many more, there is no longer time for the next class of graduates to rise to sufficient power so as to be of noticeable benefit in the war. And yet our mustered might failed to bring the imperial prophecy to fruition. What has changed now, other than having 3 fewer imperators? I can hear that which is unspoken. A common thread. It is time we abandoned Bastion and focused all our resources on conquering the pit. That we should no longer funnel resources and treasures home to help raise up the next generation, but instead move everything to the front. You are a symbol of how we as a society are willing to sacrifice ourselves for those who shall be reborn. If you were to move to the front and avail yourself of Ruby Mana, you could immediately ascend to Crimson Earl. Everyone knows it. There would be consequences to my leaving. Of course. Pyre Lords and Dreadblazes would quit the plains and their guard duty to follow you deeper into hell, resulting in more attacks upon the farmlands and consequent downturn in productivity. The houses would vie with each other. Civil war is a distinct possibility. Most importantly, we would signal to all of hell the time has come to utilize our full resources and every ability. We're simply out of time. So there's a long pause, and it says, Desiree's heart hung beside her, dense and brilliant, saturated with rare gold mana. She expanded her awareness, sensed the great souls further within the complex, felt the iron mana flowing through the lava, the copper in the air, the roiling font far below. Felt her domain, her center of power these past 5 years, the echoing hallways and audience chambers, the bedrooms and mess halls, every corner and inch of it under her preeminence. To withdraw her protection, allow everything to fall to chaos. And I really enjoy the mental image of how pale she is and her white outfit and her hair in the midst of all of this like fire and black and red. It's just such a contrast in what you would expect her domain to look like right now, you know? I just thought that was kind of a fun subversion of expectations in terms of, because like obviously hell, the lava thing, this isn't just unique to where she is. But I feel like it would be very easy to sort of emphasize the appearance of things sort of aligning with her a little bit more. And instead, he's choosing to emphasize how apart from it she seems. Let's see. She says, I won't leave matters to the houses. We'll summon the autocrators and have them agree to a pact, to form a consortium that sends the gold mana deeper into hell as before. They shall divide a small amount equally amongst themselves and organize the running of the fiery shoals and the defense of the Rascor plains equitably. We shall have them make heart oaths to obey this accord and to carry on as best they can in my absence. And Desiree has an almost blank face, but Nova can tell that she is looking with pity, which, yikes. And she says, if you will it, it shall be done. But it really, it's giving, there's really no point. They're all going to die. But if you want to try this pointless waste, then sure, you know. So sadness suffused the White Queen. Even Desiree couldn't predict all the consequences of such a decision. To be quit of the Rascor plains and move deeper into hell amongst her peers, where she might be a charnel duchess amongst crimson earls and imperators. It was all coming to an end. She could intuit how it would proceed. Slowly at first. Changes like her own departure notable for being isolated, and then the consequences would cascade, triggering ever more changes until the last few years were upon them and nothing would be as it was. She would play her part. She had bided her time long enough. Desiree had made one grave miscalculation. If the White Queen was to advance, it would not be to become a mere Crimson Earl. No, she would move to the vanguard and there unleash her full might and become an imperator at last. And the fact that she wants to, like, gather the autocrators is going to buy some time, I'm assuming. It's not like she's packing up and leaving tomorrow, but the fact that she has a plan to bail already, it makes me extremely concerned for our friends. Never mind the fact that they're going to be heading in a direction that the autocrators are also going to be heading in, which just feels like a mean joke. I thought we were going to be, you know, heading out on this mission separate from everybody, and that it would be a sort of under the radar type thing where nobody else is aware what they're planning or who they're going to attempt to talk to. And now they may just run into people along the way, and I don't know how that works. I just this is gonna be tense. So then we go to the last chapter, 7, and Nissa is leading them to the flame, which isn't open. And we find out that this is because his friends said he and others from the academy were welcome, basically siding with the enemy, as the people see it, and the place has been vandalized repeatedly until they finally just closed, which is so, like, the guilt that Scorio must feel over this. And it's just, he has been a real problem for them over and over again, you know? And honestly, the fact that they're still willing to deal with him speaks quite highly of them. So chapter 7 is when we find out that Nyssa is working with House Basilisk. And essentially, everything that she says comes down to, I made a bunch of oaths to them, and I don't mean any of it. I don't care about them. I will do what I need because they are the only ones that are actually focusing on the right thing. So she says, Hydra and Kraken run the show, while only Basilisk is intent on shaking things up. And she says, the truth is, they're weak. You heard about how the houses banded together to try and fulfill the prophecy? Didn't work out so well, especially for House Basilisk. They lost both their imperators, Zellar and Juranvin. House Hydra lost Imogen, but retained 3 others, one of them being Sol the Just. And I'm curious because, they lost their imperators, but Imogen is still alive. So what does lost their imperators mean? Because they're not dead, evidently. And is Sol the one that Imogen summoned back to try and talk to him? Or was that... I can't remember. Yeah, your Sol the Just. Yeah, okay, I think that must be why she says it that way. Weakness breeds desperation. Basilisk will do anything for power, including, as you said, shady dealings. But more importantly, no house is so invested in shaking up the current power structure, which is why I was embedded in the rebellion and told to assist in whichever way I could. Wait, you're just a Basilisk operative? Between you and me, I couldn't care less about Basilisk's future, but everything is a means to an end. I needed training, elixirs, and support to survive out there, and they provide all of it if I agree to mouth certain oaths and throw in with their efforts. So here I am, happy to work for one house against the others, aiding the rebellion and getting my vengeance regardless of what takes place. And all of this is really... it's just something to be extremely wary of. Doing the right thing is not ever mentioned. This isn't something that is of interest to her to the point that it doesn't seem to have even occurred to her as a motivation. And I'm a little surprised that she is as direct with Scorio as she is about how little she means these oaths that she's taking, or how she doesn't have the same ideals as the people who are fighting for this rebellion. The fact that she is so open about this, I feel like maybe she's potentially shooting herself in the foot later, you know, but I don't know. So let's see. Your mentor supports change in the favor of the people of Bastion. Nyssa shrugged. She says she does. But, you know, she just supports change in favor of House Basilisk. In this case, though, it may be the same thing. Depriving Hydra and Kraken of power would suit Ieria just fine. And he bails and goes to talk to Leonis and is feeling genuinely relieved to get out of this conversation, because it's very clear that her sort of mercenary attitude is bothering Scorio. And I had forgotten, when Leonci and Leonis pull him out of this, they demand to know how he won the gauntlet. And I didn't even clock the fact that there was no time for them to talk about that. So they're still walking around without the story. And he doesn't even get a chance to tell it here. Everybody's sort of chiming in with where they died and how, you know, whatever challenge changed and that wound up killing them. And all he says is, it was after you fell Leonis, that I made Tombspark. And he gets to tell them about his new power. I have a shroud just like Jova, a floating shield I can summon, but it drains my mana faster than you'd believe, strictly for emergencies, I guess. It's like your dark vision, cut in Leonchi. The higher you advance, the bigger and better it becomes. When you make Pyre Lord, it becomes a perfect sphere that protects you from all sides. And Scorio says, reaching the Tombspark could have made a world of difference. The second trial, well, you know what they say, best if you don't know about it till you reach it yourself. And I like that he's just doing the same thing, because that is apparently the ideal way to go into it. He's not wrong. So let's see. My new power, I don't have a good grasp of it. It's a mental or emotional effect, throws people off. I'm still figuring out the nuances. So, this is when they reach the flame, and they go inside. The place is very shabby in the light without a crowd, which is just the way of nightclubs. The place when the lights are turned down, but you've got a bunch of strobes or, disco balls or lasers going. You got music pounding, tons of people, lots of laughter and drinking, and it's always going to seem like it's really happening. And you go in there when all of that hasn't been put in place yet, and it's a really shocking difference, even if you're prepared for it. So, this is when we come across old Mimic. And the door is locked, and he's yelling that they're closed. Once he realizes who it is, he lets them in, but is like, yeah, I don't like to leave this unlocked these days. So, Nissa drops them off. She does not come in with them. And Mimic, he says, Feiyan said she'd be coming by later this evening. Things aren't looking good, my young friend. You'd be wise to stay off the streets. And Scorio tells him that we're going to try and help. We want to broker peace. A beautiful dream. But this world is not governed by rational thought. Would that it were. All of Bastion is gripped as if by fever. We're going to connect with Manticore so as to speak with the White Queen. A grand idea, but I can't say I have much hope of it working. Mimic, he's just out here just being like, good luck to you, but I don't see it. The great souls have only one demand, and that is that we ordinary people suffer in noble silence and wait. But we know what that really means, that we aren't important enough to be concerned over, and should just quietly die, while the great souls go about their business. Which, that feels familiar. And this is when he says, I'll drink to the White Queen and your sudden sense of civic duty. Scorio tried to think of a response, but felt only chagrin. He clinked his cup against Mimic's and took a sip. All this time, all these long months, he'd thought of nothing but his own goals, his own advancement and ambitions. And all that time, the city had been simmering, its discontent growing. The truth was that he hadn't concerned himself with it at all, just like the other great souls, not until he no longer stood to benefit from the academy. And you guys remember, there were multiple times where our friends were on the street passing the poor or, encountering demonstrations, and it never seemed to occur to them to do anything about it. And, it just was a shock to me, because Scorio, being somebody who came up from nothing, I would expect to be more sensitive to that sort of need. And it's not like it absolutely never crossed his mind, but it was just like this flicker and then was gone, and he was immediately super hyper focused on his next moves for himself. And maybe that's just, I am not somebody who is as focused as Scorio, and so that is why I find it hard to understand. But I'm glad that that's being addressed here. The difference, though, between, in my opinion, him and Nyssa is that Nyssa seems like he doesn't think of it, but once it's shoved in his face, he's like, oh, this is the right thing to do. And I think he would likely be willing to do this because it's the right thing to do, regardless of the situation he found himself in, if it were impressed upon him how necessary it is. However, the only reason it got impressed upon him how necessary it is because he was literally confronted with a group of people who were not happy to see him, who were fighting for this rebellion and expecting him to participate. And even though he's following Nyssa down there after killing an enforcer and seeing all these people massacred, even then, he's not going down there with the intention of throwing in with them. Even then. So I really, I want to say that he would be motivated by more, but I don't have a whole lot of evidence to back that up. So I don't know. Anyway, Jova finally chimes in. We didn't leave the academy to help negotiate new terms. If that had been our goal, we'd have served the people better by remaining in the houses and working to help them from within the system. We've got to focus on getting to the White Queen and asking her about the herdsman, if she can even be trusted to answer us honestly. And then, here we have Helena and Feiyan showing up, and they are genuinely happy to see him, despite the fact that Feiyan pretends she's not. And they are quite shocked to hear the turn that things have taken. He's not joking. That's fantastic. A desperate ride to fetch a savior in our final hour. I'll have to double check if they're still in town. Manticore doesn't just sit around waiting to be called on. Are you just looking for an escort, or do you still want to join them? An escort, for sure. As for joining them, maybe? If we figure out the situation? We'll need a plan, and we don't have one yet. Manticore could be what we're looking for. Won't that make them feel special, said Feiyan. I did think that was a funny response. So then we have a little talk about how they are standing by their decision to allow Academy people into their club that doesn't really exist right now. And they take a bunch of money because she's like, Feiyan's like, you aren't going to need any ox while you're on the plains, so just give them here. I'll go see if they're still in town and arrange a meeting. This is just like the time we first met. No need to thank me. We're just doing business. She really is a sweetheart, said Helena as her companion turned to stride away. She's just really, really, really good at hiding it. So then there's the mention of the gauntlet run, because Helena is just like, did you win it? And she's sort of joking. And when he says that he did, now we get into him telling the story. And the chapter ends with him saying, it all started with my good friend Nox and his delightful secret marinating technique. And that is the end of the chapter. So I am really curious what Manticore's person is going to be like. Their ambassador? I don't even know what to call them. Contact? And I really just don't know enough about the houses really to make it an informed guess on this. So I'll be very curious about this. All right, folks, I have got to wrap this one up, but thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Thank you to Dan for commissioning this. Appreciate you a lot. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.